I got a question for you. What is the hardest part of learning the German language? The answer might not be what you expect. Let's take a motorcycle ride around this mountain lake and talk about it, and I'll offer up my personal opinion on this subject after having learned the German language now for many years. This is Lernen und Fahren. So, what is the hardest part of learning the German language? That's a tough question. Let's start by itemizing some of the more difficult aspects of the German language, and we'll see if something on the list stands out as being the worst offender, the hardest part of learning this language. Let's start with the obvious one, grammar. German grammar is more complicated than English grammar, sometimes much more complicated. For example, how do you say "the" in German? It's a trick question. You think it should be a simple question because it's just one word in English. But in German, there's a bunch of different ways to translate the word "the" depending on what you're talking about. And so the next logical question you might ask is, okay, why are there that many ways to say "the" in the German language? Well, the answer has to do with the German case system. If you're not familiar with the term grammatical case, don't feel bad. You probably haven't heard it since you were in grade school. The English language has 3 grammatical cases, subjective, objective, and possessive, but the German language has 4. And the 4 German cases map to the 3 English cases in weird and sometimes unexpected ways. This can make it very hard to master. And it leads to something called grammatical gender, which we don't really do in English. Every single noun in the entire German language has a grammatical gender attached to it. And every time you learn a new noun, you have to memorize not just that noun and what it means, but also what its grammatical gender is. Otherwise, you can't use it properly in a sentence. For example, the German word for dog is Hund. If that word seems familiar to you, it's because the English word hound, as in you ain't nothing but a hound dog, it comes directly from the German word Hund. Okay, great. So let's use it in a sentence. I see the dog. Ich sehe the Hund. Which one of the many options for "the" do we pick here? Is it die Hund, der Hund, das Hund, dem Hund, den Hund, des Hund? I don't know. How am I supposed to know that? You have to learn the grammatical gender of every single noun in the entire language in order to learn how to apply it properly in a sentence. That's crazy hard. And it also leads to something like adjective endings. We don't do this in English. Our adjectives generally don't change form in English. Let's look at a word like freundlich. It means friendly. Can I just say in German that someone is friendly? Yes, you can. You can say, sie ist freundlich. She is friendly. Okay, great. But we have a problem in German in that if you stick an adjective directly in front of a noun, it has to take an adjective ending. And the type of adjective ending that it takes is going to vary depending on the grammatical gender of the noun that you're describing and its plurality and what case you're in. So, ein freundlicher Hund, eine freundliche Katze, ein freundliches Wesen. Ich spiele mit dem freundlichen Hund. Oh my God, how many ways are there to say friendly in German? There's a bunch. So you look at that and you think, well, I can never master that. That's crazy. Is that the hardest part of learning German? Well, no. Buckle up because it gets worse. Believe it or not, it gets worse. We haven't talked about syntax yet. Syntax is a subset of grammar that describes the correct ordering of words within a sentence. And German syntax is more complicated than English syntax. If you're sensing a pattern here, it's because you're onto one. The German language in general is more complicated than the English language, with a few exceptions here and there. So one thing in German syntax that might throw you for a loop is the concept of separable verbs. In German, sometimes the prefix of a verb will detach and get thrown right to the end of the sentence. We don't really do this in English. So let's say a simple sentence, we arrive tomorrow. What's the verb for arrive in German? Well, it's ankommen. Okay, great. So wir ankommen morgen, right? Well, no, because ankommen is separable. The prefix snaps off and gets thrown to the end of the sentence. You say wir kommen morgen an. What? But that's 4 words, right? No, that's 3 words in German. Kommen an is the separated form of the single verb ankommen. Oh my God, okay, hang on, because it gets even worse. Sometimes the whole verb gets thrown to the end. How about we will arrive tomorrow? Wir werden morgen ankommen. But wait, you just said that ankommen is a separable verb. The prefix has to detach and get thrown to the end, right? Well, not always. Sometimes the whole verb goes to the end. So you look at syntax rules like that and you think, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But wait, because we haven't talked about prepositions yet. Prepositions are crazy hard and they're also very arbitrary. There's often no clear rule or pattern that you can latch onto to decide which preposition goes with which object. Ich sah ihn im Fernseher. Ich habe Angst vor Spinnen. Ich stand an der Grenze. If you use the wrong preposition in any of those sentences, it's going to sound very strange. So is that the hardest part of learning German? Well, not really, because almost every language has that problem. I mean, even English has that problem. You see someone at a party, or on TV, or in a car, but you never see someone on a party or at TV. And there's a big difference in English between seeing someone in a car versus seeing someone on a car. If you pick the wrong preposition, you're going to say something that sounds very strange. So maybe we can give the German language a pass on that one, because a lot of languages have that problem. Okay, so where does that leave us? There's other technical oddities we could look at in the German language. How about Konjunktiv I? What even is that? That's reported speech. We don't really have a comparable thing in English. And the verb conjugations get all weird. But Konjunktiv I doesn't show up very often. Doesn't show up too terribly often. So I would say, don't sweat that one. How about verb conjugations in general? Verb conjugation tables in German are pretty difficult compared to English. In English, at least for our regular verbs, our conjugation tables are actually quite simple. But in German, even for the regular verbs, there's a bunch of verb endings you have to memorize. Ich sehe, du siehst, sieht, wir sehen. Oh man. Every verb in the language has got a crazy complicated conjugation table that you just have to memorize. Is that the hardest part of learning German? Well, not really. At least for the regular verbs, the patterns, the word endings are consistent, so you get the hang of it over time. It gets to the point where when you encounter a new verb in German, you can conjugate it in your head just by following the same patterns you've used for other verbs. It's no big deal. Okay, how about formality? We don't really do that in English, but in German, how do you say you? In English, it's one word. But in German, there's a bunch of different options depending on who you're talking to. And let's just pick two of those on the list. There's a big difference in German between referring to someone as du and referring to someone as sie. If you pick the wrong one at the wrong formality level in the wrong occasion, you might greatly offend somebody. Is that the hardest part of learning German? Well, no, other languages have similar features. French, for example, it's the same in French as the difference between tu and vous. So if you're familiar with other languages even a little bit, you're probably already kind of familiar with this concept. How about pronunciation? The German language is very particular about pronunciation. And this is made worse by the fact that the German and the English languages share an alphabet. That might sound like it's a good thing, because there's less stuff you have to learn, but it kind of works against you, because some of the consonants, and the vowels for that matter, are not pronounced the same in German as they are in English. This is a problem, because when you see a German word, your brain sees that word and thinks to itself, oh, I know how to pronounce that word. It's wolf. Except it isn't. In German, that word is pronounced Wolf. Oh boy, now we're in trouble. You see a German word and your brain wants to read it with English pronunciation rules, but that doesn't work in German. So this word, for example, in English you might try to pronounce it as Volkswagen. Volkswagen. That's how you'd say it if it were an English word, but it's not an English word, it's a German word. The V is pronounced like an F, and the W is pronounced like a V. It's actually Volkswagen. Volkswagen. In some ways, weirdly, it might be easier to try to learn a language that does not share an alphabet with English. Let's say Russian. You'd have to learn Cyrillic from scratch. It's a completely alien alphabet. That sounds like a nightmare, and believe me, it is. But in some ways, mind you, it might be easier than learning a language like German or French, because you don't have this problem where your brain sees the letters that it thinks it knows how to pronounce, and you're wrong because the pronunciation rules are different across the languages. Let's look at French for a second. How would you pronounce this word? If you try to read it like it's an English word, you might say arrivant? Arrivant, maybe? No, it's neither of those. It's arrive. What? How do you get arrive out of that? The French love silent letters. They use them everywhere throughout the entire written language. It's annoying. You have to relearn how to read in your own alphabet, which is frustrating. How about pluralization? How do we pluralize a noun in German? My God. In English, you generally just stick an S on the end of the noun and you're good. But in German, sometimes you stick an E on the end, sometimes it's an EN, sometimes there's an umlaut shift. What in the world is an umlaut shift? And sometimes the noun doesn't even change form between singular and plural. And often there's no real clear pattern as to, when and how these words change. Oof, I can't see. This truck is blinding me. Continuing. Is that the hardest part of learning the German language? Again, I'm going to say no, not really. So, what is the hardest part? Let's take a step back. Let's take a step back because maybe we're approaching this problem from the wrong angle. Maybe the hardest part of learning the German language isn't some technical aspect of the language itself, but rather a practical problem in the environment in which that language is spoken. For example, let's say you speak English and you live in North America and you want to learn German. You might have a problem because how hard is it to find a language partner in North America who speaks German? German is not a widely spoken language in North America. Yeah, I know, it's spoken here and there a little bit, but by and large, your best language partners are in Germany. And depending on exactly where you live, that means that they're going to be in a time zone that's 9-10 hours out from where you live. That's a problem. If you want to schedule a video chat at a time of day that's convenient for you, they're all going to be asleep because it's the middle of the night and vice versa. You have to schedule it for very early in the morning or crazy late at night, and that's convenient for neither of you. So you think to yourself, well, okay, I'll go to Germany. I'll take an extended trip to Germany so I can immerse myself in the language. Great idea. Here's the problem you'll have with that. 60% of all Germans speak English, especially the younger Germans. And because of the German love of efficiency, if you struggle in German even a little bit, they'll switch. They'll switch on you, which is frustrating. If you introduce yourself to a German and you struggle in the process, like, hallo, mein Name ist, they'll switch to English, which is frustrating because you're there to learn German. But how can you learn German in an environment where all of the speakers, or at least most of the speakers, speak English as well as you do? And there's another problem here, in that there is no single universal language called German. Instead, there's a bunch of different regional variations of it, not just accents like what you see in England. Someone who's born in the north part of England speaks very differently than someone who's born in the south part of England. Same thing in Germany, but also the surrounding countries, German-speaking countries, have their own versions of the German language, their own dialects. The German that they speak in Germany is not the same as the German that they speak in Austria or Bavaria. And don't even get me started on Switzerland. In Switzerland, they have a language that they call Swiss German. I don't know why they call it Swiss German. It's impenetrable to my ears. It sounds more like Italian to me. Now, when you learn German from an internet app like Duolingo or Memrise, or when you learn German from a textbook, unless they explicitly say otherwise, what they're teaching you is a variation of German called Hochdeutsch. That literally means High German. This is the closest thing we have to a standard German that's understood everywhere. And it is really understood pretty much anywhere the German language is spoken. That's great. But there's another problem here. The problem is that just because Hochdeutsch is understood everywhere doesn't necessarily mean that it's spoken everywhere. If you go to Austria and speak Hochdeutsch, they'll probably understand what you're saying. But when they answer back because of the accent and because they might inject a little bit of their regional dialect into their responses, you might not have a clue what they're saying. So you've spent all this time learning Hochdeutsch and you still can't communicate with Germans or, Austrians, Bavarians. Even German people have this problem to a certain extent. So what chance do you have as an outsider? Is that the hardest part of learning the German language? Well, not to sound wishy-washy, but my answer again is maybe, kind of, not really. These aren't good answers, I know. Why don't we pull over and try to arrive at some kind of conclusion here? Oh, wow. It is beautiful out here. Beautiful. Let's pick a spot by the lake. So, enough with the clickbait. At the beginning of this episode, I posed a question. What is the hardest part of learning the German language? Well, you may have guessed at this point that there is no single universal answer. It depends. Everyone has a different learning style, and what an obstacle that might seem impenetrable to you could be easy to someone else, and vice versa. So the answer could be anything on this list. That's not a great answer. It's very wishy-washy and it's very clickbaity. Let's try that again. Let me offer my personal opinion on this question. What is the hardest part of learning the German language? The answer, in my opinion, is none of the items on the list that we've covered so far. There is no single one of those items that I would point to and say that right there is the hardest part of learning German. The hardest part of learning German, in my opinion, is the same as the hardest part of learning any other language. The hardest part of learning German is to keep going. You're going to hit these roadblocks, these obstacles, these frustrations along the way. There's going to be a lot of them. You're going to hit plateaus where for a long time it's not going to seem like you're learning anything at all. You're not advancing. And there's going to be a seemingly endless series of those plateaus where you gradually get better. And you have to keep pushing through that. That's the hard part. A lot of people get frustrated and they give up when they realize, oh my God, this is so much more work than I anticipated. How many thousands of hours of practice is it going to take before I can speak this language beyond a first grade level? It's too much. It's too much. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the brain power for this. I quit. And you walk away. And years later, you're talking to your friends and you say, you know, I tried to learn German once, but I just couldn't get it. I wasn't smart enough. And you wear that for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be that way. There's a better way to approach this. And that is to realize that the hardest part of language learning in general is to keep going through those frustrations. It takes a long time, but you can get there. And I know this because I got there. I'm not a particularly clever man, but I learned the German language. Maybe not flawlessly. I still make a lot of mistakes here and there. I still get corrected constantly, but I can communicate in the German language now. I never thought I'd be able to do that. It's hard and it's frustrating and it takes a long time, but you can get there if you keep going. Die deutsche Sprache ist in der Tat eine wunderschöne Sprache und ihr besitzt die Fähigkeiten, diese Sprache zu beherrschen. Es dauert eine Weile, eine lange Weile, aber ihr könnt es schaffen. So, there's my 2 cents on the subject. That's my answer to this question. What do you think? What is the most frustrating part of the German language from your point of view, or the most frustrating part of language learning in general? Post your answer in the comments down below, or shoot me an email. And if you have questions about the specific items on the list that we covered, take a look at the video history on this channel, because we've done episodes on every single item on that list, and in some cases we've done more than one episode on each of those items. So take a look through the history of this channel if you want to improve your German. That'll do it for today. We will see you next time on Lernen und Fahren. Good luck in your language learning studies.